TUFF SHIFT. Hello, world, and welcome to TUFF SHIFT, the podcast where we unpack all that goes into surviving the job and living the dream. I am your host, Sean Patrick Murtagh, and I've been going back over all the interviews. I'm getting ready to kind of change the format and bring us up to the renaissance of the YouTube era, since everyone is finding their way back to YouTube. I want to make sure that we have a presence on there too. And I was editing the first episode to get it ready. And, that was the episode I introduced you to me and how I became a walking, talking, and singing stereotype of an actor, singer, slinging hash to pay the bills. And I also shared one of my most memorable celebrity sightings, which of course, was that time that I waited on Robin Williams. Now, I mentioned that, especially doing most of my serving and bartending in New York, clearly I'm going to have a lot of celebrity run-ins. And honestly, like I said back then, for the most part, 90% of my interactions were wonderful to almost forgettable. And I think that's kind of speaks volumes to that. The celebrities are just want to be normal. They can kind of go incognito, and they can be, for the most part, lovely. And especially for those ones that I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I waited on them, almost unforgettable. I would rather that than the 10%, which I will say is maybe padding for good measure in case I've blocked some stories. It's very controlled. That's a very controlled 10%. And I will bring you those stories. Trust me. Once I find a way to present them in a fun way and a funny way, I will tell you all about that dumb, drunk moose of a man who physically accosted me in Sardis. But until then, he can ride off on that goddamn Peloton he rode in on. Today, I want to share a celebrity story that is uplifting, and someone that to this day I hold so dear in my heart. You see these amazing, lovable celebrities on TV, and you're just like, are they that great in person? Are they that lovely? Are they that fun to be around? Are they that bright and magical? And what I can tell you about a specific celebrity is that, yes, they are. And this is none other than the one and only Today Show NBC Hoda Kotb. She is as phenomenal, if not more phenomenal, of a human being than she appears to be on TV. She was a regular at a place I worked at on the Upper West Side for quite a long time. And last week in our conversation with Jessica, I had mentioned that when I worked at Cook Shop, there was a regular named Mario. And every time he walked in, you just felt the energy go down. And every time he walked in, the staff was just so disappointed and on edge because you knew he was going to be an asshole. With Hoda, it was the complete opposite. She walked in and it was just like Dolly Levi coming home to the Harmonia Gardens. She was just such a bright light, and she wanted no fanfare. She didn't want the recognition. She just wanted to have a good meal with her friends, with her colleagues, with her families. And that's what she did. She would come in and was so joyful to the staff. She lit up every time she saw us, which was quite an experience. But there was one time she came in that really stands out from the rest. And it took place during graduation season in New York, which is, May to June. And there are pockets of New York that really get hit by graduation season. And the Upper West Side is obviously one of them. So this one day I was coming in to open up for the dinner shift. And usually that transitional period from lunch to dinner is crazy because the kitchen's changing over and the daytime people are trying to get out fast, and the people coming in are trying to get their stuff ready before the daytime people leave. And the same thing with the servers. The lunch servers want to get out of there as soon as possible. They've made almost no money. And the dinner workers are, I was about to say, trying to get their side work done, but trying to have conversations with anyone and everyone before doing their side work and preparing themselves for the dinner rush. So a lot of balls get dropped. It's not a fun time in restaurants. But at graduation season, there is no in between time. You are serving, and people are coming in for late lunches. And my first table this day was a young lady in her cap and gown with her mother. And I picked up immediately, based on some of the sashes she had, that she was a Hispanic American who happened to be what I assumed to be first generation graduating from college. And this stuck out to me because, I'm Hispanic American. I'm second generation, but I'm the first generation on my mom's side to graduate college here in the States. And here she was at this very humble Upper West Side staple restaurant, having a very lovely lunch with her mother, just the two of them, celebrating her amazing accomplishment. And like I said, she's not my family, but we are from a same community. And I kind of took an ownership over this table that, like, what she had accomplished was something beyond her, beyond our community. It felt like family, even though we weren't family. Well, in walks Hoda Kotb, and she just goes straight to her table. She's talking with her friends, and I notice her notice my table, almost in the same way that I kind of picked up on what was going on and what a momentous occasion it was for these two women. And about halfway through her meal, she calls me over. I'm not her server that day, but she says, "You know what? Can you make sure I get the bill for that table? And if I leave before them, just don't tell them until I'm out of the building." And I said, "I got it." Now, not only did Hoda pay her own bill and was extremely generous to my coworker who was serving her, but she paid these two strangers' bill, and she was insanely generous in how she tipped me. And then came time for this table to ask for the bill, and I just said, "I'm so sorry, I don't know what to tell you, but I actually don't have a check for you." And the graduate, stunned, not quite understanding what had happened, I explained to her that Hoda had been in, and she had picked up the bill for her and her mother. And her mother, we're speaking in English, and her mother saying, "Mija, mija, ¿qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó?" And I said, "Señora, no se preocupe. Alguien ya le había invitado a su comida hoy. Somebody has already taken care of your meal today. It's our gift to you." And obviously, she's not an NBC person. She's more of a Telemundo and Univision lady, if you catch my drift. So I explained to her who Hoda was and what she does and the generous heart that she is. And these two women were overwhelmed. They were just washed over with gratitude and emotional. And I just remember myself getting swept up in that too, because it was a beautiful moment. And I know that I talk about how awful working in this industry can be, how it's belittling, it's dehumanizing, it's demoralizing, it's unending chaos. But moments like this remind me what true hospitality is about. It's something that I hold deep within my heart to this day. And this was at least 4 years ago. And like I said, it not just reminds me of what true hospitality is about, it also reminds me about what true humanity is about. So I just want to start the show by saying, Hoda Kotb, I want to sing your praises. I want the world to know how amazing you are, and I want to thank you. As somebody of Central American descent, witnessing what you did for these two ladies, I to the day, the last day I have breath in my body, I just want to thank you for everything you are and for what you bring to this world. Gracias. And I bring that up kind of fittingly because today's guest is no stranger to this Upper West Side haunt. He actually was a regular there. He used to live in the neighborhood, and he was known to stop by for his perfect gin martini. And he is somebody that is not just a dear friend of mine, but he's also a multi-award-winning journalist, author, and singer. Our paths cross officially in 2019 when we were both making our New York City cabaret debuts. And we became fast friends, and not just fast friends, but we became each other's cheerleaders. Now, he is has been a fixture, still is a fixture of morning television for over 3 decades. He is an international entertainment journalist and Hollywood correspondent. He also co-hosts the podcast Titanic Talk. And his book, Your Home is Your Castle, Live Like an A-Lister in a Post-Pandemic World, debuted at number one, people, on Amazon's home remodel and renovation charts. He is also the author of the popular, steamy, and semi-autobiographical book, Dancing Through the Raindrops, which I have a copy right here. And steamy and semi-autobiographical. Who knows if we get to that today? We'll see. We'll see what parts are true. And that book is about to see another sequel to complete the trilogy. And that is not all, folks, because he obviously doesn't have enough hats to wear and plates to spin. His newest novel, Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale, is coming out to Kindle on March 10th and on Amazon and Barnes & Noble for purchase on March 18th, which, if you're listening to the podcast, that's today. And if it's not today, you can still buy it right now. So, my wonderful listeners, please welcome my amazing, charming, and multi-talented and accomplished friend, Nelson Aspen.
Thank you for that effusive introduction. And I'm exhausted just hearing about everything I've done. And before we talk anything, I have to tell you that I have my own Hoda story.
I knew you would.
Yeah. I'm 1 degree of separation from everybody. You really can't stump me. I after 30 years in morning television, take that, Hoda. But yeah, I used to live on the Upper West Side, as you mentioned, and I'm an OCD avid runner, and I would be out in Central Park before the sun. Now that I live in Harlem, I don't go running before the sun. I time my running around the sunrise. I go out 5 minutes before the sunrise so that at least there's light. But back when I lived on West 84th Street, I would go out pre-dawn, and I would see in Central Park almost every day Hoda by herself before dawn, running before she would go into Rockefeller Center to do her show. And I'm telling you, that woman, whenever I saw her on the street or in the park, was never without a smile. That smile that she lights up television with in the mornings is exactly her smile, and she is never without it. I'm sure she has miserable moments just like the rest of us, but she doesn't show it when she walks out of the house. So there's something to be said for, just strap on your smile and have at it, because she is the real deal, as you mentioned.
100%, and the impact that you can have on somebody, because we're not, as waiters and bartenders, we're not often met with that, and when we are, it's never sincere. But like I said, when you walked up to her table and she looked up at you, it was just like a floodlight. It was so much light and so much joy. And I almost opened the show with something different, but I'm like, you got to talk about Hoda. And I just somehow knew, not just because we have that restaurant in common, not just because I've seen you at that restaurant, but I knew that you had to have a Hoda story, because I know you have lots of stories.
I have a lot of stories, and that's why those books are steamy. The home renovation book is not steamy, but everything else I've written has sex in it, including the Titanic book. One reviewer said to me, I came away from the book feeling like I knew what it would be like if Grindr had been on the Titanic. So if that isn't motivation to read it, I don't know what is.
I love that. And I'm also thinking, maybe just throwing it out there, home remodel can be sexy. So maybe there's a new edition that needs to be released. But before we get to all of these amazing stories, steamy and non, I want to start the show off the way I always start the show off. I want to know, Nelson Aspen, what was your first job in hospitality that made you become this walking stereotype of an artistic human being, paying the bills by slinging hash?
Yeah, there's a special talent needed to excel in service. It is a talent I don't necessarily possess, but I made my primary living when I was up and coming as an aerobics instructor. And that taught me a lot about basically customer service, because I was training very high-end, demanding. We didn't have the word Karens back then, but they were Karens. And but it led to my ultimately training Princess Diana, which ultimately led to my career in morning television, because they put me on TV because I was Princess Diana's step Reebok aerobics instructor. But in those years, in the early 90s and into late 80s into the early 90s, I was doing anything to make a buck. And like there was some catering waiting things that I have blocked out. But when I was living in Los Angeles and I was teaching aerobics on Robertson Boulevard at Jane Fonda's workout, she had come out with the VHS. And so she had opened an aerobic studio on Robertson, an Olympic Jane Fonda workout. And I was an instructor there. And my grandmother informed me, oh, you have a second cousin in Los Angeles. You should meet them. And I'm thinking, oh, God, who wants to meet some long lost cousin? Like, there's a reason why I moved to Hollywood. I don't want to. But so begrudgingly, I met my cousin, and he was the hottest, coolest guy. I can't believe I'm related to him. He's just the coolest dude I ever met in my life. And he was managing a French restaurant across the street from Jane Fonda Workout called Peretz. And so he's like, do you want a job as a waiter? You'll make a lot of money. And I'm like, I don't have the skill. By now I was in like, I can't learn this skill. I'm too old. I'm too set in my ways to be good at something that requires skill. I said, I can be a host. I can be your maitre d'. And so I became the maitre d' at Peretz. That lasted 3 months. And that was the end of it until Keith opened another restaurant out of Aspen, Colorado, and it came to Beverly Hills. And it became famous for all the wrong reasons. And I was the maitre d' at Mezzluna, which is where Keith met and fell in love with O.J. Simpson's ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. And Nicole lived right up the street from Mezzluna. And we were all friends and we all hung out together. And OJ would periodically come into the restaurant and harass Nicole and harass Keith, my cousin Keith. And obviously we all know what happened to Nicole and one of the waiters from Mezzluna, where I was the host. And my firm belief is that poor Ron Goldman was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because the murderer, O.J. Simpson, of course, was found not guilty of the murder, but many of us believe otherwise. But I also believe that Ron Goldman was not his intended target, and it was an accident. It was that he was going after Nicole and Keith, sort of same coloring, body types, and Ron was over at Nicole's to return her mother's glasses that she'd left at the restaurant. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But my tough shift, I don't have any, I just was the host. And Laura Layton, who was famous as Sydney on Melrose Place, beautiful redheaded Sydney on Melrose Place. Laura Layton was the bartender, and I was the maitre d'. And Keith and Nicole were always there at the restaurant, and OJ would periodically come in and, just be kind of a jerk. But yeah, lots of, as you know, from especially in cities like New York and Los Angeles, very star-studded. Barbra Streisand came in one time and had to face a corner. Like she wanted a table facing a corner because she didn't want to make eye contact with anybody. And she ate her entire meal staring at the wall. And I thought, why wouldn't you just get takeout? Why would you come in here for that?
I think that draws a little more attention, and it's the opposite of like the mafia table, because the mafia table has you without your back towards anyone. So it's bizarre that anyone would want their entire back, especially someone of her celebrity. But yeah, just to be staring at a wall. You can stare at a wall at home. It's those celebrities who don't want to be seen but want to be seen. It's like that. But the second question is usually like, what is your tough shift that stays with you? But I think you kind of may have worked that in there, because quite a memorable, quite a memorable event took place there.
No doubt, and we. Life changing. It's one of those, where were you moments. And I remember they had interrupted Young and the Restless. The local news had interrupted Young and the Restless to announce that Nicole and at the time an unidentified male had been found murdered. And my first thought was, oh Christ, it's Keith.
Yeah.
Phone rings and it's my mother. My mother's like, oh, thank God you answered. Her first thought was that it was me.
It was, oh,
She thought, oh, that I would have, gone to take the glasses over to Nicole's mom, which I would have if why wouldn't you? She'd lived around the corner. Her mother was lovely. So just a very weird thing. You can in LA, and now that you live in Southern California, you can
yeah.
testify to this, that it's very hard to denote time. It has to be a major significant event like an OJ, or I was there for the riots, the Northridge earthquake. It has to be something cataclysmic, because otherwise it's just another sunny, beautiful day. And time goes by. All of a sudden you're like, I've been living here 20 years. Well, let's see. There was before the earthquake and after the earthquake, before OJ, after OJ. And, sadly now you have the fires.
Exactly. I've only been here 2 years, and it just kind of like, that was such a huge shakeup. And I told the listeners before, like, I survived a fire in my apartment in New York City, and it was not, and like, I had to walk because the fire was like at the fire escape. So I had to walk through the stairs inside to get out, like in the smoke. And that was not as eerie or as panic provoking as driving down Lincoln and being like, what's the holdup? And what's this? Why does the marine layer look so weird? I'm like, oh, that's not marine layer, that's smoke. And the hills are alive with the sound of fire. It was the most bizarre thing. And it's like, I guess I had my LA marker, but
yeah, you will. You'll have your 2 years, your childhood, your LA childhood, and then the fires, and now I guess you finally hit puberty.
I get here we go. So the one thing about working as a maitre d', I know you said you don't have the skill set to be a server, you don't have the skill set to do this, and I feel like for maitre d's and hosts, they often get the short end of the stick. Like, it's almost like anyone can do this job, and they have customers complaining because, why are you sitting me at this table by the kitchen, and why are you sitting me at this, and I'm an hour late to my
Nobody ever
reservation.
likes their first table,
right?
They always complain. Nobody, and I'm very conscientious of that now. When I'm seated somewhere, I'm like, you know what? And my husband will be like, oh, why didn't we get? And I'm like, just take it. There's a reason why we're sitting here.
Well, yeah, and so many times it's just like, anyone can do this job, but you guys are the first line of defense at the restaurant, and you get like, it's not just the first person that the customer sees, but you're the first person the customer complains to. So, and my first job in the restaurant was, I did start off as a host before I moved up to waiting tables. So I commend you, and especially
I thought I'd be getting $20 bills thrown in. I always thought like, oh, they're going to slip me 20 to give them a better table. And none of that ever happened to me. And Laura Layton, the bartender, you were encouraged by management. Usher people to the bar, make them wait for their table because they'll spend money at the bar. So, I'd get them to the bar, have a drink while we get your table ready, blah, 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 blah. And then when it's time to sit down, you know how it goes. The average person's like, they don't want to have to pay their bill at the bar. They'll just like, send it to my table, transfer it to the table. Well, the bartenders hate that. And Laura Layton she'd be in my face. She's like, make sure they settle before you take them to the table. So, and you're right. The host doesn't benefit from tips. I didn't get tipped out to. I guess nowadays you would tip out to the host, I would assume. But I didn't. I just was there for the minimum wage and the free meal.
Hey there, just checking in. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. And if you are, why not leave us a 5-star review and a comment or two wherever you're listening to this from. And don't forget to follow us on social media at TUFF SHIFT Podcast. That's TUFF Shift Podcast. Everywhere. Literally everywhere. And just a reminder, gratuity's not included, but tips are always welcome. And you can find our virtual tip jar at tuffshiftpodcast.com. That's TUFF shiftpodcast.com. All right, back to the show. I judge everything. I have made it very clear. I judge everything, whether it is working on set, whether it is a cast party, whether it's working in a restaurant. Yes, the pay is nice, but was I fed? Was the food good? I get you there. And that's also kind of like why I'm a bit more pro pool in houses like that, to where it's like everyone gets a bite of everything, and you don't have to worry about transferring the check. You don't have to worry about this and that, because the bartenders do get screwed over. So to listeners who have not worked in the industry, if you experience that to where you go wait for your table at the bar, even if they say don't worry, close out. Close out. Check with the bartender. Hey, is it better for me to close out with you? Is it better for me to do X, Y, and Z?
I'm
Check with
very
them.
sensitive to that. I always try and close out before, even if they offer to send it to the table, I'll say, "Are you sure?" Because of that. I also am the king. I don't know if you know this about me. You might. I'm the king of $2 bills. I always keep a wad of $2 bills in my wallet and sometimes if I know I'm going out to dinner, I'll put them in groups of five, so that they're $10. 5 2s are $10, and they just make great things to hand off. Then people like the novelty of a $2 bill, and if you get them from the bank like I do, they're nice and crisp, and they're just great for that kind of tipping. If you want to thank the host, hand them a bunch of twos.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think
I had a
power.
client that I worked for, that I did bookkeeping for, and she did the same thing. And let me tell you, as a bartender, especially, we remember everyone who tips. So if you want to have your nickname be nice when we see you coming in, because we don't remember everyone's names, but we remember what we call you behind the scenes.
Most bartenders call me Beefeater Martini, extra dry, extra olives. That's my name to most bartenders.
I love that, and I love that drink, because I know you love martini. I'm more of a vodka person, but I love that, because a lot of people, martini culture is something that is just lost. Nobody knows it anymore, and I kind of like take delight, because I'm just like, if somebody's annoying me and they're like, I'll just have a martini, da 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 da, and I know they mean vodka, I'm just like, oh, so which gin would you like? And just seeing them, like, I'm like, oh, no, I want gin. Like, that's a martini. Like, because they just like kind of throw it off, like, I'll just have a martini, as if I'm supposed to know that they want Tito's or they want Kettle One, because like, and they're like, and no vermouth. I'm like, well, that's not a martini. So I love that you not only partake in martini culture,
I
but
do
you're up to
love
date
my
with it.
gin. What can I
Yeah.
say? Uh, Bar Hill is my preferred gin for sipping. And as martinis go, I love me some good old fashioned Beefeater. I'm a man
Yeah.
of my generation. And I do like, there's a local gin made in Brooklyn called Green Hook. And I'm very fond of Green Hook gin.
Green Hook is wonderful. And just a quick shout out to the people at Bar Hill. When I worked at Cookshop, that place where we had that awful regular named Mario, who I'm just going to keep saying, they would come in, because this is when they were first getting started, because Bar Hill started off, they made honey. They were bee farmers, basically. And then started making gin. And they would come into Cookshop and do tastings, and they gave away bottles. And they were just, I love their gin, because everything is like kissed with honey.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
Well,
beautiful.
you can
So
sip. You can just drink Bar Hill on the rocks with a twist. It's great. And my friend Amy, who I've known since the early '80s, she's their sales rep. So she's the one that
oh
turned me on to Bar Hill. But during COVID, they turned me on to the Bar Hill hand sanitizer,
oh
and it's, I think at the time, made in Montpelier, Vermont. At the time of COVID, it was one of the top 10 hand sanitizers. So, they do more than just get you drunk. They help clean your hands.
and they're adaptable as a business too. They're willing to do anything. I love how, like, of course, not only do we have Hoda in common, of course, like all the things we have in common, of course, you mentioned Bar Hill, and we both have nothing but amazing things to say about
Bees
them.
knees.
They are the bee's knees. So I think we've talked enough shop about restaurants, and it'll come and go throughout the interview as it
Oh,
naturally will.
and you mentioned Cook
Unless,
Shop. Wait, in
yes,
Cook Shop is some of the scenes in Kindred Spirits are set in Cook Shop. Cook Shop is in the book.
I swear to God, I swear to God, Nelson.
I don't know if French Roast is, but Cook Shop is.
That's amazing. Oh, I really can't wait to read this one.
Oh, it's filthy.
That's, oh, I love it.
It's the dirty Titanic book you didn't know you were waiting for.
You're talking to a Scorpio. I will devour this. But I want to know, I want to transition. How do you get out of restaurants, and how do you start your 3 decades on morning television.
Yeah,
What was
I
that
was I
transition like?
I was just doing the survival job thing in Los Angeles, and I was working at Mezzluna, and I was teaching aerobics. And the the studio where I was teaching, one of the many, I was teaching at every available studio. I'm a worker, so I was teaching a zillion classes a week and eating at Mezzaluna every night. And one of the studios where I was teaching was adjacent to a hotel where British flight attendants stayed. And one flight attendant she knew Princess Diana's personal trainer. And she loved my step class and thought it was innovative. And they arranged for me to go to London and train the princess in step aerobics. It was a new thing at the time. And I was vetted, and off I went to the United Kingdom, very excited to meet Princess Diana. We had the same birthday. But when I got there, they decided, oh no, you're not going to train Diana. You're going to train her trainer and all of the gym staff. And as disappointing as that was at the time, it was fine because they had me as a guest on the morning show, and I had my mullet because I was of the time, and I had looked good in my little lycra bike shorts going up and down on the step with my mullet. And they decided they wanted to give me a job as the Hollywood fitness correspondent. So I started doing hard-hitting stories like Fitness for Pets with Betty White, Hypnotize Your Boobs Bigger. It doesn't work. And, those kinds of crazy, health and wellness kinds of stories.
Doesn't work on any body part.
No. And Florence Henderson was a licensed hypnotherapist, and she actually told me she could hypnotize someone out of being gay. And she has become such a gay icon as Mrs. Brady that I decided not to divulge that part of our interview because I didn't want to cost her any gay fans. Thinking like, lady, do you really think you can be hypnotized out of being gay? Like, I just thought, she's, but I didn't want to, I didn't want to get her in trouble with her gay fans that way because she loved the gays. So
yeah, especially something she would later realize on her own, like, whoops.
Of course. But anyway, so I did 10 years of morning television for the UK until a new Australian show was being formulated. And they saw me on the British show and asked me if I would like to come to work for their show instead. The hours were much better. The time change between LA and Australia was much preferable to the UK. So I did the Australian morning show for 20 years. And that's when I became the entertainment correspondent, and I've interviewed just almost every star under the sun and covered every event under the sun. And did that through COVID. And once COVID was over, I decided the daily grind, it was time to branch out into new things. And the books, Kindred Spirits is my 9th book. So I never dreamed I would be a full-time novelist, but that's where I am, and I'm loving it. And I'm still doing cabaret. I won 3 Broadway World Cabaret Awards last year, which was an unexpected gift for my Tony Bennett tribute show, which only came about because I interviewed Tony Bennett in his home about his painting. I didn't want to talk to him about his singing. That's too easy. That's too on the nose. He was passionate about his painting. So we did a whole marvelous story about his painting. And when he passed away, I wanted to do a tribute show, of course, with his music, but talking about his painting and his other gifts. Everybody knows he was a singer, but did you know he liberated a concentration camp? That's what I wanted to reveal. These are the things that are more interesting to me. And my lifelong love of Titanic, the whole cliche of do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So my love for the Titanic, I now have a successful Titanic podcast, Titanic Talk. And I've got the book. And when the submersible imploded a year or so ago on its way down to the Titanic wreck, all of a sudden I'm being sought after for TV shows because I'm a Titanic expert and I can talk about the Titanic knowledgeably. So go figure. You don't know where these things are going to. You never know what you're going to become famous for.
Exactly.
You just don't know.
Which is which speaks to why you should always not, in an inauthentic way, but you should really be thoughtful and mindful on how you treat anyone and everyone, and really be thoughtful and mindful about how you do any task. Now, I don't want to get too far because we're going to get to the book and we're gonna really unpack that. But you mentioned about interviewing Tony Bennett and not asking what everyone else is asking. I think especially with, and trust me, girl, I loved Wicked. I devoured it. I love the Broadway show. I love the movie. I love everything about it. Um, but I feel like the press tour really showed us, and we've seen it in movies that take place within the industry and in all the press junkets we've seen in our lifetimes, that you know they get asked the same questions, and in some respect, the same questions have to be asked for each market. I think we're moving away from that as we become more of a global market, and one source of media can be seen worldwide. But I think Wicked really highlighted just how tedious press junkets can be when they're just like sitting in a room and everyone is rotating in and out, asking the same five questions. And I know that you have been a part of that. I know that you are currently wonderfully doing that right now, promoting your book. But in kind of the spirit of the Tough Shift podcast, have there been any celebrities that you care to share about, whether you want to share names or not? But in your press junket experience, is there a celebrity, one, that just stuck out as being the most gracious, the most engaging, to where you almost felt you were being interviewed? And has there been a celebrity that has been a little disappointing with how much you respect what they do, but not how they treat people?
I've done hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of junkets, and that assembly line system, you develop a way about it. And some celebrities are better at it than others. Some journalists are better at it than others. Immediately coming to mind, to quickly give you an example, some stars that are difficult would be, although he gives great interviews, Vin Diesel is a terrible problem because
Mm.
he's chronically late, like literally 7 hours late, or miss your plane and have to stay an extra night kind of late. And unapologetic because he's a big Mr. Movie star. And the iron, and it's not only a waste of everybody's time and money, but then your interview time gets cut down. You might have started out having a 10-minute interview, and you're lucky to get 1 minute. And I got to a point where it's like, oh, fuck off. I don't need to have 10 minutes with you. I just need to prove that I'm in the same room with you. Give me one question. That's all I need. But it's, you know what, Vin Diesel, it's your loss. It's not my loss. It's actually your loss, because we all are pissed off that you've wasted our time and disrespected us this way. So that's an example. Or Ryan Reynolds used to be great, but as time went on, the more I interviewed him and the more famous he got, he kept getting thinner, he kept getting better dressed, and then all of a sudden there were, I need to see the questions beforehand. I'm like, you're kidding. It's an animated movie. What do you think I'm going to ask? That kind of thing. On the Kevin Spacey, combative, bullying.
Well, we're seeing that now in real time.
Yeah, good celebrities. Hugh Jackman, always. He has
Yeah.
a charitable coffee company called Laughing Man. It's some Ethiopian
I had no
charitable
idea.
coffee thing. Yeah. But so when he does a junket, he brings a barista to make coffees for the journalists in the holding area. And he'll come out and go, how's everybody's coffee? Like, what do you like? He gets how to be a part of the ensemble. You feel like you're all in it together. Julie Andrews, I interviewed her a total of 8 times. I still am holding out hope there might be a 9th or a 10th. But she had me to her home here in New York one time and had a tea party for me. I'm like,
Oh,
fucking Julie Andrews is serving me tea. It's unbelievable. And it really doesn't take much. Yeah, I don't think she made the tea herself. I don't think she was up all night baking scones for me. But it really, when you're somebody of the level of a Julie Andrews or a Hugh Jackman for that matter, it takes nothing to
it's
give
there.
a little bit of yourself.
It's there, and this may seem like a stretch, but I think, respectively, it is their version of their $2 bill. This is something that's nothing for them. It's
Great
just a nice
analogy.
touch. Like, I can bring you some coffee, I can bring you some tea. That's nothing as far as effort goes on their end. Just like a $2 bill, it's like I could have given you 2 singles, but a $2 bill has a little more thought to it, and I'm going to remember your kindness, for going out of your way to go to the bank. Like, so that's their $2 bill. And I think you couldn't have picked two more loved celebrities
Oh yeah, they're just.
to
I
mention.
find the older celebrities are always the most fun for me anyway. I guess that's a sign of my age. But they really don't give a shit. You
Yeah.
get to a certain age, they know who they are. They're not too worried about how they look or what or how they're comfortable in their own skins. We should all learn from them that way. Plus, the older folks have the best stories and they're
Oh,
not
yes.
afraid to tell them. So from a journalist point of view, give me Clint Eastwood, give me Betty White, give me Julie Andrews any day of the week over, the 20-year-old du jour.
Or the dumb drunk moose of a man that I will share with the audience someday. But I will say, for the younger generation, I would love to shout out Jonathan Groff, because I waited on him at Cookshop. Actually, you know what? I never waited on him. He came to Cookshop. He was waiting for a friend. He was sitting on the benches in front, and I was coming to work. And I just stopped. I'm like, "What do you got to lose?" And so I just stopped and I said, "Hey, I think you're amazing, and I'm an actor myself here, pounding the pavement. And I just want to say, like, I look up to you, the sound of your voice, blah 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 blah." And he just was like shocked, like as if he'd never heard any of those things before, and so sincere. And he just like was like, "Well, what are you auditioning for? What are you getting called back for?" And just like checked in with me, and I was like, "Okay, well, that's not the point of why I stopped you." Um, and it just I sang his praises to him for a little bit. Flash forward a year later, he comes back into Cookshop with Leah Michelle, and I drop off their drinks. So again, I've never waited on him. This is like a year later. I drop his drinks off, and he stops and he goes, "Oh my God, it's you! How are you? How are your auditions going? What have you been working on?" Da da da. Like he remembered me from the bench out front a year ago. Like that that was just, I mean, it just made me feel like, holy shit, like this guy is genuine, and whatever he does, I mean, he's obviously easy to support for his looks and talent, but his heart, that is just, it was such an absolute beautiful thing to experience. And so I do, just to shout out, there are some young people
Good for
that
him for
have that.
having the presence of mind to remember, to pay enough attention to you
Yeah.
initially to remember you after the fact. And good for you for making an impression just by your own effervescence and personality, obviously. And I've interviewed plenty I went through a big young music phase to the point of where Camila Cabello started referring to me as Uncle Nelson because I was
Oh,
interviewing her so often. And she's another one. She's wise beyond her years and very generous and gracious. But I went through the Miley Cyrus bit, the Shawn Mendes, Leah Michelle, all the youngsters. But Camila Cabello, she is the way you're describing Jonathan. She was that way, and although he's not a kid anymore, Daniel Radcliffe, while he was doing there's How to Succeed in Business. Here's a story you'll appreciate this because it not only shows what a good person he is, but it's Broadway. So one of my mates was a dancer in the show, in the chorus of How to Succeed, and his dad back in Australia had passed away, and he had to get back to Australia, and he was scrambling to get a ticket on the plane and to get back there. And Daniel bought this kid a first class ticket so that he could not only get home quickly, but get home in comfort because it's a long ass flight from New York to get to Australia. But that said, and he didn't, I only know that from the kid. So
yeah.
like that wasn't something he did to get in the newspaper or to get positive publicity. That was something he did because he's that kind of a guy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So I want to get back because this is not. I'm glad to share these good news, all this good news about these celebrities, but we're here to talk about you, and we have your accomplishments in certain areas of your life. Now I want to know. I'm going to share a clip about the Titanic tale, but I want to know, how did you stumble into, or did you always want to? Where did the author Nelson come from?
Well, for your YouTube audience that can see this interview, I will show you the giant tattoo on my leg of Poseidon as depicted in the 1972 disaster epic, The Poseidon Adventure, which profoundly changed my life when I saw it in theaters at age 8. But I always had a fascination with ocean liners, and Titanic in particular. I was captivated by it. And I don't know why this terrible tragedy is so romantic to so many people. You don't feel that way about 9/11. You don't feel that way about the Challenger exploding. But there's something about Titanic that is romantic. Civil War, you could argue, like look at Gone with the Wind. There's a romance to the Civil War. I don't know. I don't understand it, but Titanic is the same way. And I had a series of coincidences over my life. My name is Nelson. I enunciate very well. People don't often misunderstand me. However, my entire life, people mistakenly address me as Milton. It happens constantly. Plus, I had this fascination with the Titanic. Before the internet, before James Cameron's movie, Dr. Robert Ballard discovered the wreck of the Titanic in the late 80s. And I was so compelled that I got in touch. He was the most famous man in the world that week. I tracked him down using the phone book. Remember phone books? Are you old enough to remember phone books?
Oh, I do.
And I dialed him from my little apartment in Manhattan. And I got through. First of all, it's crazy that I even got through to him. And I got the secretary, back when they called them secretaries, the secretary. I'm like, this is Nelson Aspen in New York City, and I'd like to talk to Dr. Robert Ballard. Please hold. I thought, I'm never going to get to talk to him. He answers the phone a minute later and goes, hello, Milton. Like, Milton. And I began to figure out who was Milton. And like I said, it was before the internet, and I found a book about a young man on Titanic named Milton, and how he perished was similar to a recurring dream I had. So I'm not the type that believes in metaphysical stuff. However, it's hard to deny those kinds of coincidences. So now here we are, and I've got this highly successful Titanic Talk podcast. I'm, an expert in the Titanic community, and I thought now's the time to write up my story of Milton and my connection to Milton. And having just come off the very steamy, naughty 80s and 90s Raindrops novels, my publisher said, I don't want another period story. Like, because you told me about your experience in the 80s and the 90s. So if you're going to do this Titanic story, I would like you to set it in the present day. Well, then it's no longer my story, because my story isn't present day. My story was in the past. So I used what I knew about Milton and my connections to Milton, and I've crafted this historical fantasy. So it's kind of an odd couple story. What do? It starts out on the Titanic, and we discover Milton in 1912. He's 29 years old. I know I have the facts. I mean, it's very meticulously researched and accurate for the historical part, but I then expand it to create a fantasy of this young Edwardian man who has a close relationship with another man on the Titanic. Milton doesn't make it. So he comes to present day New York unexpectedly in the body of an extroverted, partying gay guy on the loose in modern Manhattan. And two souls, one body, and they're kind of an odd couple. And one helps the other sort of settle down and grow up, while the other one helps Milton explore this side he could never have explored under the constraints of Edwardian society. And together, in this one body, they unravel the mystery of what happened to Milton's unrequited love from the Titanic. So you're traveling between time and dimension. I had a hell of a lot of fun with it. And it should be fun for the reader. And there's sex, there's mystery, there's a ghost story, and there's plenty of Titanic. So it ticks a lot of boxes. Inspired by my own experience, Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale, is a historical fantasy that spans time and dimension, between the terrible frigid night in 1912 when Titanic met her tragic fate and the hedonistic party scene of modern Manhattan. This is a story of love and redemption denied to individuals by the constraints of the conservative world into which they were born. Critics say it's an original and totally unexpected story that's charming, heartwarming, witty, and sexy. One of the most unusual love stories you'll ever read. The author's passion burns on every page, weaving history with wit and charm, a joy to read. Unravel the mystery of two men from different centuries who are kindred spirits. Available on Amazon or ask for it at your local bookstore.
And I think it's also important what you're doing here. I was actually just listening to one of my favorite podcasts yesterday. It's called the Gay Ass Podcast, and the guest was talking about it's very sex positive. It's very in your face. But the guest was talking about what is lost seemingly today with all the technology, all the apps, all the parties and people. What is wonderful about how we as queer and gay folks get to live out loud in as weird as that seems with all that we're facing right now in society. But comparatively, we get to be ourselves, regardless of what other people have to say about it. But with the apps and the technology and the online and all the social media stuff, what's missing is the nostalgic erotica. What is missing is the queer stories. I remember when I went to college, a friend of mine from high school, which the internet was barely functioning. It was still dial-up. You couldn't be on the phone and the internet at the same time. So, and coming, we were high school kids. He got me as a going away gift I think it was called the Freshman Club. I mean, it was smut. It was gay smut. But I just remember that was our access to that, and kind of just, we didn't have Grindr. We barely had chat rooms. So we didn't really have access to any of that. And it's kind of where I got going into, granted, this is a novel, it's fantasy, it's completely made up, but it was the representation I had to be okay, I'm entering the world as an adult gay man. What is the romantic scene like, and all that. And I know that may seem like a stretch or whatever, but I think it is important to have these stories and to have this art form live on. And in the other side of that is to have these voices of the people who didn't have Grindr back then, didn't have social media, couldn't tell their stories, couldn't sell their books. You give Milton, even though this is a fictional retelling, you give Milton and every queer person who did not have this platform, you give them a voice. And I think I think that's part so important, because it's easy to say, "Ooh, it's steamy. Ooh, it's this," but it is important now more than ever to our
Yeah,
communities.
and I like to think, this guy, this rather obscure person from history, his name pops up in a few books, but he's not a major character in the Titanic story. So I'm not only, giving him a story, but here we are, we're saying his name. 113 years later, we're saying his name. And some of the letters that his surviving friend wrote to Milton's parents were so beautiful that it told the love story. Whether or not, I don't know, maybe he wasn't gay, but the letters were so beautiful and touching. And to go to Milton's grave, his body was recovered and he was buried alongside of his parents, who died much later, sadly. I mean, it's a terrible tragedy for all. But even the inscription on his tomb in Massachusetts seems to fit the story. So there, I don't know, you could call it serendipitous, but I've stopped believing in coincidences. I don't think there are such things as coincidences. They're not as coincidental as you think.
Well, and especially when they beat you over the head as much as
Yeah.
Milton has.
Yeah. So
That
and here we are. We're saying his name, and it's a good yarn. I love the Aussie vernacular of a yarn, and the book is definitely a yarn. It's a fun story. It's got mystery, and I can't seem to write anything without sex anymore, and that might just
I'm
be
not complaining.
that's Jackie Collins's influence. I spent a lot of time with Jackie Collins over the years, and she was so gracious and so talented in her writing of her steamy Hollywood naughty novels. However, she was a brilliant businesswoman, and she never
Hmm.
arrived anywhere without books. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty swapping some cash. You want a copy of the book? I'll sign it for you. We can take a picture, but you're going to pay me $20 for the book, or what, whatever. She was a
Brilliant.
businesswoman first.
That's amazing. And I know, not to get at, put the cart ahead of the horse, or however the saying goes. I know we still have to wait for the release date, or apparently you're listening to this now, it's released.
It's out.
But
It's out.
just
They
hearing you,
moved it up on me because there was a demand for it, and the intention was to release it in tandem with the anniversary of the sinking, which is April 15th. But people were clamoring for it sooner, so it's out and seems to be doing well. And then I will, with April, with the anniversary, I'll be launching a book tour that will take me initially to Long Beach, California, on board the Queen Mary. For all you ocean liner lovers, we'll be doing Titanic weekend with other historians, actors from James Cameron's film. There will be just all things Titanic aboard the Queen Mary the weekend of April 10th. Then I'm heading to Los Angeles. I'll be doing an event on the 15th, which is the anniversary of the sinking, at the Four Seasons in Los Angeles. Hopefully you'll come by.
I'll go to Long Beach too.
Come to Long Beach. Come aboard the ship. Come aboard. And from there, I'll be doing signings in New York. It's all on my website. New York, London, Baltimore, and then culminating in Belfast, which is where Titanic was built. And I will be at the Titanic Museum, Titanic Hotel, and Titanic Distillery, where we're going to devise some signature drinks called Kindred Spirits. And I told them they have to make them with gin.
Oh my God, that's brilliant. Oh my God, that's brilliant. Oh, I love that. So, I mean, I was already interested in this book just by the synopsis you gave me. But in hearing you speak about it, I'm just like, okay, well, this needs to be adapted into a play. It needs to be adapted to a miniseries. It needs to be adapted into a film. I haven't even read it yet. And I am already just so enthralled
Spoiler alert,
with.
Milton dies. There you go.
Let me tell you something. I tell people, and I use the Titanic as a reference point. I'm like, it is literally impossible. Like, I'm not somebody that spoiler alerts bother. I'm like, it is literally impossible to ruin a movie for me because I watched the Titanic and I still hold my breath. So I will mourn Milton
On a
multiple times.
very serious note, the folks who survived Titanic paid a big price for
Yeah.
surviving. There was tremendous survivor's guilt. There was tremendous post-traumatic stress. A lot of suicides came out of Titanic survivors. So it's a complicated story. It's easy to take it, like we were saying before. It's easy to romanticize it, but it was a tragedy the likes of which the world had never seen. And I think that is also a lot of its staying power. It would be lovely, and I can't write a sequel. This is it. This book is a one-off. It'd be nice if there were a dramatic interpretation, but I do have plans. Having won those Broadway World Cabaret Awards, I figured the cabaret community, I have to somehow capitalize on the fact that I won 3, including Best Show. I mean, come on, like I feel a responsibility. You can't win Best Show and not follow it up with something. So I thought, well, what can I do? This is the year of Kindred Spirits. So in July of 2025, I'm going to return to the very first place I did a cabaret show in 1987 when I was a baby. Don't Tell Mama. It's still there. It's still fabulous. Sydney Meyer, the manager, is a doll of the first order. And I'm going to do a Kindred Spirits cabaret show in July of 2025, where we'll do book signings afterwards. But I'll tell some of my Milton stories and sing some appropriate nautical songs that sort of fit the narrative. And that'll be my entry into 2025 cabaret.
Oh, it's going to be beautiful. And for everyone listening, I have seen him live. I've seen his cabarets. I voted for him for the Broadway World Awards.
Thank you for your vote.
I truly recommend whenever you see him, whether it's in New York or in your hometown, please please just take the chance to take all of them in. And as we kind of approach our initial descent, I want you to once again just give the audience, give our listeners where and how to find you and where and how to find this book.
Contrary to what you might think, my name is not Milton. It is Nelson, Nelson Aspen. I'm really the very easiest person in the world to find on social media, Instagram, Threads, X, even LinkedIn. And I just joined TikTok, but Nelson Aspen was already taken, which is weird. So I'm Nelson.Aspen on TikTok, but I'm really not into TikTok. All the other things, Nelson Aspen. But if you Google me and come to my website, nelsonaspen.com, then you can see everything I'm doing, where I'm going to be performing, where I'll be doing book signings. It's all there. And the book, of course, Kindred Spirits, A Titanic Tale, is available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, or ask for it at your local bookstore. If they're not carrying it, just ask for it. They'll order it for you. And I await your feedback. I want, we live in such an interactive world through social media and everything now. We're used to immediate feedback. And it's funny now with a book, like it's not enough to buy the book. I need you to tell me what you think of it, for better or worse. I want that feedback.
It very much is, one of the things I live for and I talk about in this show a lot. Not only rate, subscribe, and comment on this show, but on all the guests. It's the easiest way to support artists is to like, comment, subscribe, leave a review. Just leave a review and help share it with people you think. We all went to go see the Titanic movie in 1997. Whoever's listening to this right now, you know somebody who would love this book. So share it, and run people's numbers up. All right, that's all I have to say. And also,
oh, that's a good plug. That's a help. I mean, that's not just nice in terms of like, oh, hey, marketing. Because I remember in 1980, my first professional acting job was 1983 on the soap opera Search for Tomorrow. And back in those days, you actually had to go to the ad agency to pick up your check. They couldn't even be bothered putting a stamp on it. You'd have to go and pick up your check. And the ad agency was over on 3rd Avenue, the Lipstick building.
yeah.
It was next door to the Lipstick building. I don't think the Lipstick building was there in 1983, actually. But on the ad agency check, I was so excited to tear open my first paycheck for acting. And on the ad agency, they had the motto of the ad agency printed. Granted, soap operas were invented to sell soap. Let's not kid ourselves. The motto of the company was, "It's not creative unless it sells." And I was my artistic sensibility was offended by it. But the truth is, you could have the greatest art in the world. And if somebody isn't seeing it, paying to see it, or buying it, it might as well not exist. A big part of art is marketing.
You can't just feed your soul. You also have to feed yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth.
And it's a tough shift sometimes.
It is a tough shift. Speaking of tough shifts, this is how we end every episode. As I'm sure you know, speaking of reviews and comments and word of mouth, it's a lot easy in this day and age, and for as long as word of mouth has been around, for bad news to travel much faster, if at all, than any good news. So I like to end the show by highlighting the people in our lives that have made our tough shifts more manageable. So whether this was at Mezzluna, whether this was in England or through your Australia correspondence, in your married life, anyone in your life that you would like to shout out and say thank you for today for making a tough shift more bearable.
Well, in keeping with that theme then, my cousin immediately springs to mind because he not only, this stranger that I only met as a young adult, but yet we are connected by blood, introduced me to the restaurant business as a favor to give me a job and some meals to eat. And through watching him survive the O.J. Simpson trial and the subsequent decades of torment that guy went through without ever losing his personality, his sense of humor, his charisma. He's one of the most charismatic people I've ever met. I can't believe I'm related to him. He's unbelievable. And so to my cousin Keith, that's who I say. He's had some tough shifts over the years, but he always comes out being as thoroughly unique as the day I met him.
Well, there you have it. Keith, this episode is for you. And clearly, the world needs more people like you. This has been another episode of Tough Shift. And just remember, tough shifts build character, and character is what brings your story to life. Take care. Tough Shift was created and hosted by Sean Patrick Murtagh. It was recorded on Riverside and distributed with Buzzsprout. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and maybe a comment or two. And remember, tough shifts build character, and character is what brings your story to life.